The sound was so faint that most men would have walked right past it. Germany, May 1945. The war was ending, but the land still carried the weight of everything it had endured. Fields stretched beneath a pale morning sky. Farmhouses stood silent behind rows of bare trees. Railroad tracks cut across the countryside like long scars disappearing into the horizon. Staff Sergeant William Carter had spent nearly a year crossing Europe. He had seen cities reduced to dust. He had seen roads crowded with refugees searching for home. He had seen people who no longer looked surprised by loss. By then, very little shocked him. His unit had been assigned a simple task that morning: inspect an abandoned rail line several miles outside a small German town. Intelligence reports suggested that equipment, supplies, and rail assets had been left behind during the final chaotic weeks of the war. Most of the work was routine. Walk the tracks. Check the rail cars. Document what remained. The sun was climbing slowly when William spotted the train. It sat alone on a side track surrounded by waist-high grass. Rust covered the wheels. Dirt streaked the steel panels. The locomotive was gone. Only a handful of freight cars remained, motionless beneath the growing heat of the day. One of the soldiers glanced toward it and shrugged. "Looks empty," he said. Nobody argued. It certainly looked empty. The windows were covered with grime. The paint had faded. One of the cars leaned slightly to one side as though it had been forgotten for years rather than weeks. The men continued walking. Then William stopped. He turned his head. For a moment he thought he had imagined it. The breeze moved through the grass. A crow called somewhere in the distance. The rails clicked softly as metal expanded beneath the warming sun. Then he heard it again. Tap. 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 So quiet it almost disappeared into the wind. William narrowed his eyes. Another soldier looked back. "You hear something?" William asked. The man listened for several seconds before shaking his head. "Probably metal shifting." Maybe it was. Freight cars made noises. Wood settled. Steel expanded. Old machinery groaned for no reason at all. But something about the sound felt different. It carried a rhythm. Not random. Not mechanical. Deliberate. William walked toward the nearest rail car. The grass brushed against his boots. Dust swirled beneath each step. The others watched but stayed behind. The closer he got, the quieter the world seemed to become. No engines. No voices. No birds. Only the distant whisper of wind moving across open fields. Then it came again. Tap. 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 This time there was no doubt. Someone, or something, was inside. William stopped beside the weathered wooden door. A heavy iron lock hung from the latch. Rust covered its surface. The seal appeared untouched. He stared at it for several seconds. A freight car sealed from the outside. No markings. No paperwork. No explanation. The sound came once more. Weaker now. Barely there. Tap. William felt every man behind him go silent. The abandoned train no longer looked abandoned. Whatever waited beyond that locked door had survived days alone in darkness. And for the first time that morning, nobody was thinking about rail inventories anymore. They were thinking about who could still be alive inside. No one moved for several seconds. The soldiers stood facing the freight car while the morning sun climbed higher above the fields. William Carter kept his eyes on the rusted lock. The sound had stopped again. That was somehow worse. When the tapping was there, it proved something remained alive inside. Silence invited darker possibilities. One of the men stepped closer and pressed his ear against the wooden wall. He listened. Nothing. Another soldier glanced toward William. "What do you think?" William did not answer immediately. He rested his hand against the weathered boards. The wood felt warm from the sun, but beneath that warmth lingered a faint chill, as if the darkness inside had preserved its own separate world. Then he felt it. Not a sound. A vibration. So weak it might have been imagined. 3 soft taps. Slow. Careful. Deliberate. Someone was still trying to be heard. William took a step back and looked at the lock again. The iron had been exposed to rain and wind for weeks. Rust covered every surface. Whatever had been sealed inside had not been meant to leave on its own. Around them, the countryside remained peaceful. Wildflowers grew beside the tracks. A breeze moved through the grass in long waves. From a distance, it was almost impossible to believe that anything urgent existed here at all. Yet every instinct William possessed told him otherwise. He had learned something during the war. The most important discoveries often appeared ordinary from the outside. One soldier walked down the line of rail cars searching for markings. There were none. No shipping destination. No unit designation. No inventory number. Nothing. It was as though the train had slipped out of history and been abandoned by everyone who once knew its purpose. That does not make any sense, the soldier muttered. William agreed. Even in chaos, records usually existed. Orders existed. Explanations existed. This train seemed to have none. Another faint sound emerged from inside. Not tapping this time. More like movement. A shuffle. Then silence again. William noticed something else. The small ventilation openings near the roof had been partially covered from the inside by scraps of fabric. Faded cloth hung motionless behind the narrow gaps. Someone had placed them there intentionally. Perhaps to block sunlight. Perhaps to preserve warmth during cold nights. Either way, it meant thought. Planning. Survival. The realization settled heavily over the group. Whoever was inside had not simply waited. They had endured. William imagined long hours passing in darkness. The slow loss of any sense of time. Morning blending into afternoon. Afternoon disappearing into night. The uncertainty alone would have been exhausting. He looked down and noticed marks near the base of the door. Tiny scratches. Dozens of them. Some old. Some newer. The wood had been worn smooth in places by repeated contact. Someone had spent a great deal of time near this entrance. Waiting. Listening. Hoping. One of the soldiers removed his canteen and stared at it thoughtfully. Nobody spoke much anymore. The situation had changed. This was no longer an inspection. It had become a rescue. William walked to the side of the track and scanned the empty landscape. No vehicles. No nearby buildings. No sign that anyone else had visited this place recently. The train sat alone beneath the open sky, forgotten by a world already rushing toward the future. Yet behind that door, the past still remained. Waiting. William returned to the freight car and rested both hands on the heavy metal latch. He could feel every eye in the unit fixed on him. The silence inside seemed almost alive now. As though whoever waited there could hear the voices outside. As though they understood that something was finally different. William drew a slow breath. Then he looked at his men. "Get the tools," he said quietly. "We are opening it." No one hesitated. Within seconds the soldiers were moving. And somewhere beyond the locked door, hidden inside darkness that had lasted far too long, a final faint tap answered them. The tools arrived quickly. A crowbar. A hammer. A length of steel taken from a repair kit. The soldiers gathered around the freight car while William Carter positioned himself beside the door. Up close, the lock looked even older than before. Rust flaked away beneath his fingers. Dust coated every edge. Whatever story belonged to this train had been sitting here for a long time. One soldier wedged the crowbar beneath the latch. Another steadied the door. William nodded once. Metal groaned. The sound echoed across the empty countryside. For a moment nothing happened. Then the latch shifted slightly. Another pull. Another metallic groan. The old lock finally surrendered. It dropped into the grass with a dull thud. Nobody spoke. The soldiers exchanged brief glances before turning toward the door. William wrapped both hands around the handle. The wood resisted at first. Dirt had settled into every seam. Time itself seemed to hold it shut. Then slowly, inch by inch, the door began to slide open. A narrow strip of darkness appeared. Cool air drifted out. Not cold. Not warm. Just air that had spent too many days separated from sunlight. The opening widened. The darkness remained. At first William could not see anything inside. His eyes struggled to adjust. The freight car was deeper than he expected. Shadows filled every corner. Then something moved. A face. Small. Pale. Motionless. Standing several feet back from the doorway. William froze. The soldiers beside him froze as well. More faces emerged from the darkness. Another. Then another. Then 5. Then 10. Children. Every one of them staring toward the light. No one rushed forward. No one cried out. They simply stood there, blinking against the brightness pouring through the open doorway. Some shielded their eyes. Others squinted as though they had forgotten what sunlight looked like. The silence felt almost sacred. William had prepared himself for many possibilities. He had not prepared himself for this. A little boy near the front held a worn blanket against his chest. Beside him stood a younger girl with tangled blonde hair. Further back, older children remained gathered together in small groups. Protective. Watchful. Patient. One soldier removed his helmet slowly. Another lowered his eyes toward the ground. The expressions on the children's faces were not panic. Not fear. Something quieter. Something harder to describe. They looked like people who had spent too many days waiting. William climbed carefully into the rail car. Dust floated through shafts of sunlight. The interior smelled of old wood, dry air, and crowded days. Along the walls sat empty containers, folded pieces of cloth, and makeshift bedding created from coats and blankets. Evidence of survival. Evidence of endurance. Then William noticed a girl standing near the center of the group. She appeared older than the others. Perhaps 13. Perhaps 14. Thin but upright. Exhausted but composed. Her blue eyes never left his face. While the younger children looked uncertain, she seemed focused. Alert. Responsible. As though she had been carrying something far heavier than her own survival. This was Anna Weber. William did not know her name yet. He only knew that the others kept glancing toward her. Following her movements. Trusting her presence. The girl stepped forward slowly. One careful step. Then another. The younger children remained behind her. She stopped several feet from William. Neither spoke. Language suddenly felt unimportant. The silence carried enough meaning on its own. Anna looked toward the open doorway. Toward the sunlight. Toward the soldiers waiting outside. Then she looked back at the children behind her. Finally, she lifted one trembling hand and pointed toward them before placing that same hand against her chest. It was a simple gesture. Yet William understood immediately. She was not asking for herself. She was asking for them. Every instinct she had left seemed directed toward protecting the others. William felt something tighten in his throat. For nearly a year he had crossed battlefields and borders. He had witnessed destruction beyond anything he once thought possible. Yet standing inside that forgotten freight car, surrounded by children who had endured days of uncertainty together, he felt a different kind of weight. Not despair. Not anger. Responsibility. Behind him, sunlight continued spilling across the wooden floor. For the first time in many days, the darkness inside the rail car was beginning to retreat. The first canteen arrived only minutes later. A medic handed it to William, who crouched near the doorway and placed it carefully on the wooden floor. No one rushed toward it. That surprised the soldiers. The children simply watched. Then all eyes turned toward Anna Weber. She stood quietly for a moment before kneeling beside the canteen. She took a small sip herself, barely enough to wet her lips. Then she passed it to the youngest child nearby. The pattern repeated immediately. One child drank. Then another. Then another. No arguments. No pushing. No panic. The soldiers exchanged glances. Something unusual had happened inside this freight car during the days it sat abandoned beside the tracks. Order had survived where chaos easily could have taken its place. William watched Anna carefully. She moved through the group with calm efficiency, checking on one child, adjusting a blanket for another, offering reassuring words in a soft voice. The younger children seemed to relax whenever she appeared beside them. She could not have been more than 13 years old. Yet she carried herself with the quiet authority of someone much older. The medic eventually climbed inside and began speaking through a German interpreter attached to a nearby unit. Simple questions. Names. Ages. Whether anyone felt ill. Most answers came slowly. Many of the children appeared exhausted. Some struggled to remember exactly how many days had passed. Time had become blurred inside the darkness. Then the interpreter asked a question that changed everything. Who took care of everyone? The answer came immediately. Every child pointed toward Anna. Some raised their hands. Others simply looked at her. One little girl reached for Anna's sleeve and held it tightly. The freight car fell silent again. Anna lowered her eyes. She seemed embarrassed by the attention. William noticed that reaction more than anything else. She was not seeking praise. She had simply done what needed to be done. The interpreter moved closer. Can you tell us what happened? Anna hesitated. Sunlight spilled through the open doorway, illuminating dust drifting through the air. Beyond the tracks, the countryside remained peaceful. Birds moved across the distant fields. The contrast felt almost impossible. Finally, Anna spoke. Her voice was soft but steady. The interpreter listened carefully before translating. The children had been evacuated during the final months of the war. Different towns. Different families. Different destinations. Nobody seemed completely certain where they were supposed to go. Orders changed. Routes changed. Adults came and went. The world around them grew more confusing each week. At some point, they were placed aboard the train. They expected the journey to continue the next morning. It never did. The train stopped. The adults disappeared. Days passed. Then more days. No one returned. As Anna continued speaking, William noticed that she never described her own fears. She spoke only about the others. The youngest children had cried during the first nights. Some became frightened whenever darkness settled over the car. Others worried they had been forgotten forever. Anna responded by creating routines. She organized sleeping spaces. She encouraged everyone to share blankets. She led simple songs when fear became too heavy. Every morning she asked each child to tell one story about home, a favorite meal, a pet, a birthday, a family tradition. Anything that helped them remember life beyond the freight car. William listened without interruption. He found himself picturing the scene. A group of frightened children sitting in darkness while a 13-year-old girl worked every day to keep hope alive. Not through strength. Not through authority. Through kindness. Through patience. Through the simple decision to care for someone besides herself. One small boy sitting near the wall suddenly spoke. The interpreter smiled sadly before translating. She told us someone would come. The boy looked toward Anna. Every day she said someone would come. Anna remained silent. Her eyes drifted toward the open doorway and the sunlight beyond it. William followed her gaze. For 9 long days she had chosen hope when certainty did not exist. And somehow, against every reasonable expectation, hope had been right. Later that afternoon, trucks arrived to transport the children to a temporary relief center. Blankets were distributed. Fresh water was brought in metal containers. Medical personnel moved carefully among the group, speaking softly and taking notes. Yet before anyone left, William found himself returning to a question he could not shake. How had they endured so many days alone? The answer unfolded slowly as Anna continued sharing their story. It had begun with uncertainty. The train had stopped without warning somewhere along the rail line. At first nobody worried. Children had spent months watching schedules change and routes disappear. Delays had become normal. They expected adults to return within hours. Morning became afternoon. Afternoon became evening. No one came. The first night felt long. The freight car cooled after sunset. Small voices filled the darkness. Questions passed from one child to another. Where were they? When would the train move again? Had someone forgotten them? Nobody had answers. Anna remembered sitting near the wall beside a younger girl named Marta who could not stop crying. Outside, wind rattled the train. Every unfamiliar sound felt larger in the darkness. By the second day, concern began replacing confusion. The older children searched every corner of the freight car for supplies. They gathered what little remained. A few pieces of bread. Several canteens containing small amounts of water. A handful of apples stored in a crate. It was not much. Certainly not enough for so many children. That was when Anna made her first decision. Everyone would share equally. No exceptions. The younger children received their portions first. The older ones accepted smaller amounts without complaint. Somehow the simple act of creating a plan calmed the group. It gave shape to hours that otherwise felt endless. On the third day, sunlight became their clock. Thin beams entered through narrow ventilation openings near the roof. Each morning the children watched those beams crawl slowly across the wooden walls. When darkness returned, another day had passed. Anna turned the routine into a game. Every child was asked to describe something waiting for them at home. One spoke about a dog that chased squirrels. Another remembered the smell of fresh bread from a neighborhood bakery. One little boy described a fishing trip with his grandfather beside a lake. The stories grew longer each day. They became a way of keeping the outside world alive. By the fourth day, fear returned. Not loudly. Quietly. Children began asking questions nobody could answer. What if no one came? What if the train stayed there forever? Anna never claimed to know the future. Instead, she repeated the same sentence again and again. Someone will come. We just have to be ready when they do. The words became part of the freight car. They passed from child to child. Even the youngest eventually memorized them. On the fifth day, rain fell outside. The sound echoed across the roof for hours. Some children stretched blankets beneath tiny openings where moisture collected. Every drop mattered. Every small victory mattered. By the sixth day, exhaustion settled over the group like a heavy blanket. Conversations became quieter. Movement slowed. Yet each morning Anna continued her routine. Check on everyone. Count everyone. Speak to everyone. No child was allowed to feel invisible. No child was allowed to feel forgotten. On the seventh day, she found a pencil stub and several scraps of paper inside an abandoned satchel. She began writing names. Every child. One after another. She told them that if rescuers arrived, nobody would be lost in the confusion. Every name would be remembered. By the eighth day, many of the children no longer believed rescue would come soon. But Anna still climbed near the doorway several times each day to listen. She listened for voices. For engines. For footsteps. For anything. Then came the ninth morning. Another sunrise filtered through the narrow openings. Another quiet day seemed ready to begin. The children settled into silence. And somewhere outside, far beyond the wooden walls, the sound of boots moving through grass finally appeared. The relief center occupied a former schoolhouse several miles from the rail line. By sunset, the building glowed with warm light spilling from tall windows onto a quiet courtyard. Blankets hung over wooden railings. Medical staff moved calmly between rooms. The smell of soup drifted through the evening air. For the first time in many days, the children found themselves surrounded by ordinary sounds. Footsteps in hallways. Dishes clinking in kitchens. Voices speaking at normal volume. Life. William Carter arrived shortly before dusk after filing reports with his commanding officer. He expected the children to be resting. Instead, he found several of them gathered beneath a large oak tree outside the schoolhouse. They sat in a loose circle on blankets spread across the grass. Some were eating. Others simply watched the fading sunlight. The younger children looked different already. Their shoulders seemed less tense. Their eyes followed movement with curiosity instead of uncertainty. Yet Anna Weber remained exactly where she had been since arriving. Not physically. Emotionally. While the others slowly relaxed, she continued paying attention to everyone around her. When a small boy dropped his spoon, she picked it up. When a little girl became frightened by an unfamiliar noise, Anna sat beside her. When medical staff called names, Anna quietly confirmed that every child on her list had been accounted for. William noticed the folded papers still tucked inside her coat pocket. The names. Every one of them. He walked across the courtyard carrying 2 mugs of warm broth. Through the interpreter, he offered one to Anna. She accepted it politely and thanked him. For a moment neither spoke. The evening breeze moved gently through the branches overhead. Somewhere nearby, a radio played faint music from an open window. It sounded strange after everything that had happened. Normal. Peaceful. Human. Finally, William asked a simple question. When did you decide to become responsible for everyone? The interpreter translated carefully. Anna stared into the steam rising from her mug. For several seconds she appeared unsure how to answer. Then she spoke softly. The interpreter listened before turning back to William. I never decided, he said. The younger children were scared. Someone had to help them. William lowered his eyes. The answer felt exactly right. No speeches. No grand explanation. Just a simple truth. Someone had to help. Anna continued speaking. During the first days inside the freight car, she had often been afraid herself. Sometimes she woke during the night wondering whether rescue would ever come. Sometimes she wanted to cry. Sometimes she wanted someone older to tell her what would happen next. But every time she looked around, she saw children even younger than herself. Children waiting for reassurance. Children searching for confidence in someone else's face. So she gave them what she could. Not certainty. Not promises. Just calm. William thought about that for a long moment. Many adults he had known during the war had struggled to do the same. Yet somehow this 13-year-old girl had managed it in a dark freight car with no guarantees and no authority except the trust of those around her. Nearby, laughter suddenly erupted from the group beneath the tree. One of the boys had attempted to imitate an American soldier marching and accidentally tripped over a blanket. The children giggled. Even a few nurses smiled. Anna turned toward the sound. For the first time since William had met her, he saw her laugh. It lasted only a moment. A brief flash of relief crossing her face. But it transformed her completely. In that instant she no longer looked like a leader carrying the worries of 20 frightened children. She looked exactly what she was. A young girl who had carried far too much responsibility for far too long. The sun slipped lower beyond the horizon. Golden light faded across the courtyard. One by one the children were called inside for the night. Anna stood as well. Before leaving, she removed the folded list of names from her pocket. The paper was worn and creased from constant handling. She looked at it for a moment, then carefully handed it to William. Through the interpreter she spoke a single sentence. I do not need it anymore. William accepted the paper without speaking. He understood what she meant. Every name had been remembered. Every child had been found. And for the first time since the train stopped, nobody was waiting in darkness anymore. The following morning arrived with clear skies and the smell of fresh coffee drifting through the schoolhouse corridors. Sunlight poured through tall classroom windows, illuminating chalkboards that still carried faint lessons from another time. For many of the children, it was the first morning in days that began without uncertainty. There were blankets. There was breakfast. There were adults who knew their names. Yet even as normal life slowly returned, new questions began to surface. Relief workers spent the day gathering information. Lists were created. Towns were identified. Family records were compared against surviving documents collected throughout the region. The war had ended, but its confusion lingered everywhere. Families had been separated by evacuation programs, shifting front lines, and countless changes in transportation routes. Finding relatives would take time. William Carter remained at the schoolhouse longer than his assignment required. Officially, his responsibilities had ended when the children reached safety. Unofficially, he found himself returning each day. Sometimes he helped unload supplies. Sometimes he carried boxes. Sometimes he simply sat beneath the oak tree and listened. The children seemed to enjoy his company. Language barriers remained, but children possessed a remarkable ability to communicate without many words. A smile. A wave. A shared game involving a ball made from rolled cloth. These things required no translation. Anna, however, spent much of her time assisting the relief workers. She helped identify younger children who could not remember exact addresses. She translated when necessary. She organized information with the same quiet focus that had sustained everyone inside the freight car. One afternoon, William noticed her studying a large map spread across a classroom table. Colored pins marked towns across Germany. Some represented confirmed family locations. Others represented possibilities. Anna traced one route with her finger before looking away. Through an interpreter, William eventually learned that she had not heard from her own family in months. Her hometown lay more than 200 miles away. Mail systems had collapsed. Records were incomplete. No one knew whether her parents were safe. No one knew where her younger brother might be. For the first time since meeting her, William saw uncertainty enter her expression. Not fear. Not despair. Just the quiet exhaustion of someone who had spent too long caring for others without considering herself. Later that evening, several children gathered outside beneath the oak tree. Fireflies drifted through the warm air. The sky glowed orange and gold above distant rooftops. One by one, the children began sharing stories about what they hoped would happen next. Some wanted to return home. Others wanted to find grandparents or cousins. One little girl announced confidently that she planned to own 6 cats someday. Laughter followed. Then someone asked Anna what she hoped for. The question caught her off guard. She looked around the circle before answering. The interpreter listened carefully and smiled. "I hope everyone gets where they belong," he translated. Several children nodded immediately. The answer sounded exactly like something Anna would say. William listened quietly. Then he reached into his pocket and removed a small notebook. From between its pages he pulled the folded list of names she had given him the night before. The paper remained worn and creased. He held it out toward her. Anna looked surprised. Through the interpreter, William spoke carefully. "You kept everyone together when no one else could. This belongs to you." For a moment she simply stared at the paper. Then she accepted it with both hands. The children watched silently. Nobody needed an explanation. They all understood what that list represented. Not names. Not records. Responsibility. Hope. Survival. Anna folded the paper and placed it back inside her coat pocket. The same pocket where it had remained through 9 uncertain days. This time, however, the meaning felt different. She was no longer carrying the burden alone. Around her sat children who were safe. Nearby stood adults working to reunite families. Beyond the schoolhouse walls, a future slowly waited to be rebuilt. And for the first time since the train stopped moving, Anna allowed herself to believe that she might have a place in that future too. As the days passed, officials continued searching for answers about the abandoned rail car. Reports moved between military offices. Railway records were examined. Old transportation logs were compared against evacuation orders issued during the final months of the war. What emerged was not a story of cruelty or conspiracy. It was something far more common during those chaotic weeks. Confusion. Entire transportation networks had been overwhelmed. Trains were rerouted. Schedules changed without notice. Communication systems failed. People responsible for one section of a journey often assumed someone else had taken responsibility for the next. In the middle of that confusion, a single freight car carrying children had simply disappeared from everyone's attention. The discovery unsettled many of the officers reviewing the case. They were accustomed to reports containing clear causes and clear consequences. This situation offered neither. There was no villain to arrest. No dramatic secret waiting to be uncovered. Only a chain of mistakes stretching across a collapsing system. William Carter read the final summary several weeks later. He sat beneath the same oak tree outside the schoolhouse while late afternoon sunlight filtered through the leaves above him. The report contained dates, locations, and administrative details. Yet none of those pages captured what he remembered most. They did not capture the silence behind the locked door. They did not capture the faces emerging from darkness. They did not capture a 13-year-old girl refusing to give up on the people around her. Nearby, life at the schoolhouse continued changing. Several children had already been reunited with relatives. Cars arrived carrying grandparents, aunts, uncles, and older siblings. Every reunion looked different. Some were quiet. Some were emotional. Some involved long conversations that seemed impossible to finish. Yet each departure brought a sense of relief to everyone remaining behind. The list inside Anna's pocket grew shorter. One afternoon she sat beside William on a wooden bench overlooking the courtyard. Children chased one another across the grass while relief workers packed supplies into crates. The interpreter joined them briefly before stepping away to assist elsewhere. For a few minutes, silence settled comfortably between them. Anna eventually removed the folded paper from her coat and studied the names. Several had been crossed off. Families found. Destinations confirmed. Journeys completed. She smiled faintly before folding the paper again. William looked toward the courtyard. "You know," he said through the interpreter when he returned, "most people would have been frightened in your position." The words were translated. Anna listened carefully. Then she shook her head. "I was frightened," she replied. The interpreter smiled before continuing. "Every day." William looked surprised. Anna noticed. "Being afraid and helping are not opposites," she explained quietly. The answer lingered in the air long after the conversation ended. William had spent years around soldiers. Courage was often described as the absence of fear. Yet sitting beside that young girl, he realized something different. Real courage sometimes looked much smaller. Much quieter. It looked like checking on younger children when nobody expected you to. It looked like sharing the last of your water. It looked like telling someone that help would come even when you could not be certain yourself. The evening sun lowered toward the horizon. Long shadows stretched across the courtyard. Somewhere in the distance, church bells began ringing the hour. The sound drifted across rooftops and open fields before fading into the warm air. Anna listened for a moment. Then she stood and looked toward the schoolhouse entrance where several younger children were waiting for her. They waved immediately when they saw her. She waved back. Not as a leader. Not as a hero. Simply as someone they trusted. And as William watched her walk across the courtyard, he understood that the most important part of the story had never been the abandoned train. It had been what survived inside it. 30 years later, William Carter still kept a photograph inside his wallet. The edges had softened with age. The black and white image had faded slightly. Time had touched every corner of it except the memory attached to it. He lived in Oklahoma once again. The war had become history. Rail lines had been rebuilt. Towns had recovered. Entire generations had grown up in a world different from the one he remembered. Yet every now and then, usually on quiet evenings, he would open his wallet and look at the photograph. It showed a group of children standing outside a former schoolhouse beneath a large oak tree. Some were smiling. Some looked shy. A few stared directly at the camera. Near the center stood Anna Weber. She was holding a folded piece of paper in one hand. The list. The same list that had carried every name through 9 uncertain days. William never spoke much about the war. Friends occasionally asked questions. Family members sometimes wondered what moments stayed with him the most. They expected stories about military campaigns, long marches, or dramatic events. Instead, William often found himself remembering a quiet freight car sitting beside an empty rail line under a spring sky. He remembered a faint tapping sound that almost disappeared into the wind. Most of all, he remembered what happened afterward. Several years after returning home, a letter arrived from Germany. The envelope had traveled thousands of miles. The handwriting was neat and careful. Inside was a short note written in English. It came from Anna. By then she was an adult. Relief organizations had eventually helped reunite her with surviving members of her family. She had continued her education. Later she became a teacher. William smiled when he read that part. Somehow it felt inevitable. The girl who had spent days guiding frightened children had chosen a life helping young people find their way. The letter was simple. She thanked him for opening the door. She thanked the soldiers who had helped everyone reach safety. Then she included a sentence William never forgot. "I told them someone would come because I hoped it was true. You made it true." For years afterward they exchanged occasional letters. Not many. Just enough to stay connected across an ocean. Sometimes Anna included photographs of school events. Sometimes William shared pictures of Oklahoma sunsets, family gatherings, or the small farm where he spent his retirement. Life moved forward. Seasons changed. Children became adults. Adults grew old. Yet one memory remained untouched. In the spring of 1975, William traveled to a gathering organized by several humanitarian groups working to preserve stories from the war years. There he met some of the children again. Not children anymore. Teachers. Mechanics. Nurses. Parents. Grandparents. Ordinary people living ordinary lives. The kind of lives that once seemed uncertain inside a dark freight car. They spent hours talking beneath bright afternoon sunlight. They shared memories. Laughed about small details. Recalled stories Anna had told to keep spirits alive. At one point someone asked what William remembered most from that day long ago. The room grew quiet. He thought for a moment before answering. "It was not the train," he said. "It was what I found inside it." The group listened. William smiled gently. "I expected fear. I expected confusion. What I found was courage." Years later, after William passed away, his family discovered the photographs still resting inside his wallet. On the back, written in careful handwriting, was a single sentence Anna had added during their reunion decades earlier. "Thank you for hearing the knock." Some stories begin with a door opening. Others begin with a person choosing not to walk away. On a forgotten rail line in the spring of 1945, one soldier stopped and listened. One girl refused to give up hope. And because of those two choices, a small group of children found their way back to the world. The freight car was eventually removed. The tracks changed. Time carried everything forward. But the lesson remained. Even in the quietest moments, even when the world seems determined to forget, humanity often survives through ordinary people who decide to care for someone else.